Michael Chabon is a novelist and screenwriter who co-created Star Trek Picard, which aired on CBS All Access this spring, on top of working on Unbelievable, which streamed on Netflix last fall. It's not that often to see people move so comfortably between genres. Did it feel like a major creative shift going from one to the other in, like, I don't know what the span of time was between those two projects?
I mean, absolutely. It's a completely different thing. Nobody becomes a novelist because they want to sit, with a huge group of people and engage in this kind of collaborative enterprise or effort that ends up going beyond the confines of a writer's room to ultimately include, all the production department heads and the crew and the cast and everything. If you become a novelist, I think typically it's because you like to be by yourself. And play by yourself, play with your toys alone. And that is definitely my temperament and is definitely what initially sort of, I think, made it, I wouldn't say that's why I became a novelist, but I think that made it a lot easier for me to imagine living the fairly solitary creative existence of somebody that writes fiction. So to move into something that is so collaborative, that is such a group effort in which your input, even if you're the showrunner, you still are constantly, I think if you're being smart about it and also considerate, you're continually deferring to the greater wisdom, greater expertise, and especially for somebody like me who is such a novice. That's got to be a big shift. Now, I mean, I've done screenwriting over the years. I've worked on some movie projects. I've done some collaboration in other fields, like in writing music and lyrics and so on. So it wasn't my first time doing something so collaborative, but to the extent and for the length of time that it took to make the first season of Picard, it really was a totally different experience. And I think that's part of what made it so fun for me. As I was ready. I'm 50. I'll be 57 in May. I've been working alone for a long time. It was really a nice change for me, and it was very stimulating creatively to be in this different environment.
And before Picard came, you were working on short treks, the digital shorts. Did you have does your familiarity with Star Trek, the mythology, the history of the franchise, go back long before that, or is that something that's relatively new to you?
Oh yeah, no, I've been a Star Trek fan since I was 10 years old. I discovered Star Trek, the original series, in a really intense, passionate way. In 1973, I had a babysitter who was an OG Trekkie. I mean, she was one of the first, she went to the first convention in the Washington, D.C. area, which was, I think, 1974. She introduced me not just to the show, but to the fandom of the show. And so I became both a fan in the sense of I like to watch a show, and a fan in the sense of having that kind of collective identity of fandom, of Star Trek fandom simultaneously. And, my fandom has stayed with me my whole life. I was a huge TNG fan when that show was on, and I've stuck with Star Trek through all the various series and the films, and it never left my life. There are references to Star Trek hidden like Easter eggs in, if not all of my novels, many of my novels, or there are overt references to Star Trek in my books. So it's always been a part of my creative imagination, unquestionably.
And to have that fandom of Star Trek, could you have imagined, that you would be sort of not only writing for, but the showrunner of, Captain Picard's next adventure? And what did that feel like? A lot of pressure going in? Was it surreal?
Well, I kind of came in through the back door, like the pressure of it, the sense of pressure of living up to the legacy. Kind of crept up on me, I would say, because I came in through a side door in a sense. I did, as you mentioned, I got asked to write a short, one of the short treks, and that was really fun, and it was sort of this ancillary thing or a side project. It wasn't really And then it was the one that's called Calypso, which it didn't take place within really any kind of pre-established Star Trek continuity. It wasn't set on, it wasn't about Kirk and Spock or Picard and Riker or the characters from Discovery. It wasn't. It was its own little freestanding thing. So I kind of came through that door, got asked to come on board to help create a new Star Trek series, and then fell into the job of being the showrunner quite by accident. That was definitely nothing I ever set out to become. So by the time it sort of all caught up to me and I realized like, oh my God, I'm, the showrunner for a Star Trek series that is about Jean-Luc Picard and, is set fully within this continuity and has this huge legacy to live up to. I mean, all of that stuff kind of dawned on me little by little. I think that's a good thing because it kept me from getting overwhelmed by it. And I would say, all of my partners in making the show, we all love Star Trek. We all wanted to honor the legacy of Star Trek and to make something that would be worthy of being considered Star Trek. But it really wasn't until the show was done and was going out and fans were going to be watching it that's where it really hit me hard. Like, oh my God, we tried to do this thing. I sure hope people like it.
And it does feel very much these 10 episodes like 10 chapters in a very cohesive story. Did you feel like your experience as a novelist kind of helped you with building the story and structuring it and really developing this plot in a way that was satisfying?
Well, I mean, I hope so. I think it's not that unusual to see novelists working in television now. You have Noah Hawley, you have David Benioff, you have Tom Perrotta. There are a lot of creators right now who are making serialized television who come from a novel writing background. And I think the logic there is that if you do have that kind of experience, maybe then serialized storytelling on television will be a more readily, you'll adapt to it more readily than you might to say writing episodic television. It's still such a different process. And ultimately, when you're writing a novel, things that you set up, whether you plan things out really carefully before you begin, as some novelists do, or whether you sort of just follow your instincts and get lost a lot, which tends to be my pattern when I'm writing a novel. But the question of paying off at the end of a story things that have been set up at the beginning and gathering up all the loose threads of a plot and so on and fulfilling all the sort of promises that you've established about characters and what their needs are when we first meet them versus where they are when we see them at the end. It's all up to you, and you don't have to take anything into consideration in terms of production, in terms of expense, in terms of money, basically. Like fundamentally, you're never stopping to ask yourself, like, can I afford to do that? If we have to go out on location for that, how am I going to deliver that scene when we actually have used up all of our location money and our budget, so on and so forth. Like, all that matters when you're writing a novel is, do you tie up all the threads? Do you tie up the stories that you've established in the beginning? You don't really have to worry about any of that other stuff. So, I mean, the logic is sound in one sense of thinking that novelists might be, experienced writing novels might help you write serialized television, and I think it does. But there's such a vast area of really crucial kind of existential questions that you face when you're making television that have to do with things like the budget and money and production and all of that stuff that you just don't have to worry about. That ultimately that novelist experience is only going to get you so far.
As we're recording this, the entire season of Picard has aired, so I would like to talk about some specific story points. And so just for anyone watching this, go, if you haven't seen it, pause it now, watch the entire season, come back. Specifically,
see you in 10 hours.
Yeah. So we will not have aged magically. the payoff for this season is really the season based around Data and his daughters and that sort of android technology to sort of take Picard to sort of make him into sort of one of those sort of organic androids felt like a real risk, but one that I personally thought really worked. What was your decision making going into that and taking that twist the character?
It certainly wasn't our idea from the very beginning. There's no doubt about that, but it arose fairly, I think we were, fairly well along. It was when we really started to look, okay, what are we going to be doing in this last episode or last two episodes? Because I think it was from a fairly early point that we conceived of episodes 9 and 10 as being a two-parter, structuring it as a two-parter. That we looked at what are the things that we have set up? What kinds of expectations have we created? What are the themes that we have said we will have stated by that point are the themes that are the crucial storytelling motifs that what this season is about? And one of those things was clearly and had been from the beginning this question of the validity of synthetic life, as sentient life. And it was a theme, that it was a thread that we picked up from The Next Generation, specifically from the episode called The Measure of a Man, in which Data's status as a sentient being entitled to all the same rights as other sentient life forms living within the umbrella of a federation was questioned, was challenged, and ultimately was upheld. But just for that one individual, and having chosen to follow up on that episode and to reincorporate the character of Bruce Maddox from that episode and to introduce this question on a larger kind of galactic scale, if you will, in the season, we felt like, well, we need to put our money where our mouth has been. And we knew that I think the original idea we were working from was this idea that there was going to be this large threat that was going to be at least partly set in motion by Soji herself, and that Picard was going to need to persuade her to stand down from this and to sort of foreground his relationship with her that had been built up over the course of the season to sort of, in a sense, prove his love of her by this act of sacrifice, of self-sacrifice, and show her that by doing this, he was proving to her that he considered her to be equally worthy of sacrifice as would be, a living sentient creature, and sort of an inversion of what happens in the Star Trek movie Nemesis and this death of Data that's been haunting Picard ever since, where Data sacrificed his life for Picard's. And, then once we were looking at that challenge, the idea that Picard himself was going to die, but then we didn't want him to really die. We had Patrick, a commitment from Patrick to do 2 seasons of Picard at least, and so we needed to sort of solve all of these storytelling and thematic problems. And once we really looked at it, it seemed kind of obvious that, well, here's the way to do it. And if we do it this way and Picard becomes a synthetic life form himself, then we really are putting our money where our mouth has been philosophically over the course of the season.
And another part of that twist for Picard is that you're also, as you mentioned, the tragedy of Data's death from Nemesis. We also sort of get to say goodbye to him in a concrete way here, and you have these final scenes between him and Picard. What was it like writing those and getting to kind of pay off that relationship?
It was, in a way, it was sort of a writing dream come true. And I used to talk to Akiva Goldsman. We would sort of fantasize, or I would fantasize, and he would sort of encourage me in this fantasy of writing a whole episode that would just be Data and Picard and nobody else, and all they would be doing for 52 minutes was talking about their relationship and things that matter to them, and life and death and sentience and and organic life versus synthetic life, and all of these questions. And I used to call it My Dinner with Data, not alluding to the film My Dinner with Andre. And it was a fantasy. It was a joke, I think, for the most part. But the idea that there was going to be this scene between Picard and Data in the final episode, ultimately, that was sort of going to take place literally and sort of figuratively beyond the bounds of life and death, that was going to where they would really get to connect in some way that in life they had never been able to connect, was there very early on, and it was always sort of looming there as we were working our way through the preceding episodes and all the writing challenges that they posed. But it was a little intimidating. Like, I had a sense of like more than anything else, like, I hope I don't screw this up when I do get to it. And then when I actually sat down to write it, I remember I was actually in San Diego for Comic-Con when we did the big San Diego, presentation about Picard, and I was writing the 10th episode then, and there were so many other challenging, problematic things that had to do with how are we going to resolve this story in a way that follows up on the things we've done that seemed really intimidating, that I actually started by writing that scene. So the first thing that I wrote in that episode was the scene between Picard and Data, and that turned out to be helpful to me. It helped set the tone, not just for the 10th episode, but I also then went back to the 9th episode and reconfigured some things there that made it thematically clearer for me. So, it was something I was a little intimidated by the idea of having to write, but I was more than anything really looking forward to it. And in some sense, I couldn't wait to get to it.
Now, I would also like to talk a little bit about Unbelievable, since that's such a major project this season, made such an impact last fall. How did you become interested in that story? Of course, could not be more different from
No doubt. Well, that was my wife, Ayelet Waldman, who found that story. I remember coming downstairs in our house, and she was sitting at the kitchen table, having woken up, before me, and she had her laptop open, and I walked in the kitchen, and she said, "I'm making you a cup of coffee. Sit down. You have to read this. It's an incredible story, and I think we can make an incredible TV show out of it." So, she just had that sense from the start, and she pursued it. It was on the Marshall Project, the website, and on ProPublica's website, and I read it. I agreed with her. It was an incredible story. She pursued it, and we were able to, set it up at Netflix. And, it is definitely, it was a compelling story to work on in so many ways, but it's true. Like, if it had been me, I would have read the article on the website and thought, wow, what an amazing story. What an incredible story. I don't think I would have taken that extra step to thinking, and it would make a great TV series. That really was Ayelet's insight.
And one of the, that series makes such a strong impact up front with that first episode, which centers about this experience of reporting an assault and how that can sort of be, a trauma on top of a trauma. Well, the experience of watching that is very visceral. Like, what was it like to work on that episode as a writer?
There's working on the whole story and just doing the research to write that episode and the 4th episode, which I also wrote, to read the court documents, the police documents, to read the testimony, and then to imagine it and to put yourself in Marie's place, the protagonist of that story, to try to imagine yourself into her place. And to try to imagine what it would be like to be her, to have gone through the experiences, even for me, a man who's so far removed in so many ways from having that kind of access to that kind of experience, just exercising my imagination to the extent that I was able to do that, it was painful. It was, I won't say it's traumatic, but it was, it brings you face to face with aspects of yourself as a man and brings you face to face with aspects of humanity and what human beings are capable of doing to one another, and with the injustice of our, supposed justice system, and so many dark, painful things that it was hard to prepare for. It was hard to and then to actually write it, the more difficult, more violent aspects of the story was really challenging. It took, I kind of would have to sort of, gird my loins, just summon some strength to get through it, and just to try to, because I was trying so hard, and Ayel and I working together, we're trying so hard to not impose our own sort of biases or pre-existing ideas on the material, to really follow the record. And there was a fairly detailed record in terms of court documents and police documents and testimony, and the article that I mentioned, the one that was the trigger for the whole thing. There was enough information there that you could base what you were writing on the record. You didn't have to make things up so much. So it's a very, it was a very, very different project. The working on Star Trek, everything's made up, everything is invented. That's challenging in its own way. But it was the two projects, in many ways, I don't think they could be more contrasting.
Well, congratulations on both of those projects. And thank you so much for talking to me today. I was a fan of both of them.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.